This episode is about mental health because if we can be strong and confident and do life well, we feel good emotionally and mentally, psychologically. And also when we can deal with the adversity and feel strong and confident in the face of that and treat things like anxiety and depression if they occur, then we have great mental health, excellent mental health. This episode is about resilience and mental health. Like I've said throughout this series on resilience is really two sides of the same coin. First, it's our ability to meet life challenges with strength and durability and perseverance and confidence. And secondly, it's our ability to help with the effects of toxic stress or to deal with adversity. Those two things are what resilience are to our lives. This episode is about mental health because if we can be strong and confident and do life well, we feel good emotionally and mentally, psychologically. And also when we can deal with the adversity and feel strong and confident in the face of that and treat things like anxiety and depression if they occur, then we have great mental health, excellent mental health. So let's talk about toxic stress. What is toxic stress? Basically, toxic stress is anytime you're in an environment where it causes a high, consistent, persistent stress response. And usually it's about fear. So what I find in working with my patients here in my practice, toxic stress is living in constant fear. And examples of these would be basically the three biggies I think are living in a home environment where there is constant abuse going on. So let's say you're a student or you're an adult and you go home and every time you're home, someone's yelling at you, they might be hitting you, doing other things that are extremely frightening. You're living in constant fear, like every day. You may be saying or telling me or someone else you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time. So that's a type of living in constant fear. That is toxic stress. Another one is fear of failure, a constant fear that you're going to fail at school or at work or some other place, or fail at paying your bills. That constant daily fear, that's toxic stress, living in toxic stress. And then finally, which is more recent, like the last decade or so, but extremely real, is living in the constant fear of not measuring up. So social media has a lot of great qualities, but its extremely difficult negative quality is comparing yourself to others, and I'm not as good as them, I'm not as happy as them, I'm not as wealthy as them, I'm everything, not measuring up. It's a constant fear. And then of course there can be bullying and things online or in social media as well. So the fear of not measuring up and being bullied like that or in that arena, that's another type of constant fear. And I really see that, I think we all really see that in teenagers. It's a time of life where you're really trying to fit in with your group as opposed to before. It's making sure you fit in with your family. And then in adolescence, it's breaking away and fitting in with a group. But in social media, it becomes magnified. So those are three basic examples. There are other examples of living in constant fear, and that is toxic stress. We know that living in constant fear causes changes to us. Changes to how we think about ourselves, to how we feel about ourselves and life and other people, and changes to our brain. So all three things change because of toxic stress. Now, I want to explain the brain part just a little bit, and I've got other episodes on my channel that describe this more, but this is really important to understanding how you feel or other feels after a long time of toxic stress, like maybe more than a year. What happens is these changes to two parts of the brain happen. So when we have fear, like anything that causes fear, we have this rush in the body. All emotions are feelings in the body. So we have this rush in the body caused by, chemicals and hormones and all sorts of things that happen all at once. One of those chemicals is called cortisol, and it helps us be ready to run like hell or fight like hell if we're faced with a big threat, like an animal wants to eat us, not so much now, but way back before in our past as human beings. Anyway, so cortisol is one of those chemicals. And so what happens is it bathes the brain also. It bathes the body, and it bathes the brain. And when it happens right then, right now, it's great for the brain and the body to react and respond and be safe to a threat, to something fearful. But when it happens every day, all the time, it changes this part of the brain called the amygdala. It gets larger and overactive. And then it can change a part of the brain called the hippocampus. It gets smaller and atrophied and not so active. And it does that for reasons of survival. Again, I've got another episode that explains it. Don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's supposed to happen. But what happens to us is we end up with this thing we call generalized anxiety disorder. That's the enlarged overactive amygdala. I nickname that Big Amy. And then we can also have a type of depression. There are two types, but a type I call it small hippo, which is a smaller hippocampus. So anyway, toxic stress because of cortisol, and the science tells us this, just find it anywhere. When this happens, we feel really anxious or really depressed. And so the point though is, A, it's caused by toxic stress, and B, we can treat that. Now, as I've emphasized in this series on resilience, it's three basic areas we want to focus on to build and maintain resilience. It's confidence, competence, and compassion. When we have all three of those, we are strong, we are resilient. We have more resilience to adversity like toxic stress. We have better mental health. All three things combined. However, there are times where we don't have that, especially in the face of a long time of toxic stress. So we need to do a few things to build the resilience to toxic stress, to build our mental health. These three things that we can do to build resilience and build mental health, especially in the face of adversity or toxic stress, are love, change, and serotonin. And I've realized this in my practice of 20-something years. Over time, these are the three things we need. Boil it right down. These are the three things we need to deal with anxiety and depression, adversity, and to get better, to have better mental health, to feel better. So love is, going back to what I've said all along in this series on resilience, are caring relationships, mutually caring relationships, feeling the compassion from others, having compassion for others. That's always the container for a great, wonderful life, and for resilience to toxic stress. Love or caring relationships. The next is change. When we have toxic stress going on, we want to change things. And maybe through talking with a therapist, you can help figure that out. That's up to you. But change is like, if you can, eliminating the toxic stress. It may be eliminating a relationship because that person is abusive all the time. It may be changing jobs or changing your approach in school or getting help for both so you don't feel fear of failure. It may be change how you use social media, change how you talk on social media, how you interact and how you engage, because you just don't want to be in that fear of measuring up or the fear of being bullied through it. So that's change. Another type of change is changing how you perceive of your emotions. It's what people like me, therapists, do. We help people understand what are emotions, how are they operating, what's going on. There's nothing wrong with you if you feel what you do. Let's change what you're feeling. That's a change for adversity and toxic stress. And the last thing is by adding particular skills and abilities, which is the competence or competencies part of resilience. Skills and abilities to manage life and your emotions, and just being able to eliminate and deal with toxic stress by adopting and having some certain skills and abilities for that. The last thing in terms of dealing with toxic stress and building resilience might be serotonin. So serotonin is one of the natural chemicals in the body, and we have medication. They're called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. But basically, they just cause more serotonin to circulate through the brain and the body. When that happens, and the science tells us this, and I see this in my practice all the time, when someone has generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder, and I notice the signs and the symptoms, I say, I really recommend you not only see me and make changes and focus on caring relationships, but you take a serotonin medication for at least a while. So what happens is when you put serotonin into the system through a medication, it shrinks the amygdala. It just shrinks it. The science tells us that, study after study, and I see it in my practice all the time. It can also grow the hippocampus. Again, science tells us that, and I see it in my practice all the time. But the most common response to toxic stress is generalized anxiety, because when the amygdala gets bigger and bigger, our fear response gets bigger and bigger, and we're just anxious and fearful all the time. That's generalized anxiety. And it's no way to live. It's a natural response. Evolution shaped it that way. It's a natural response to your environment of constant stress or constant fear. But no one wants to live that way. And so, little kids probably don't need serotonin so much if they've grown up in toxic stress or constant fear, and the research tells us that, because their brain can change really easily. But the older we get, maybe adolescence, but certainly into adulthood and later adulthood, serotonin becomes rather key to shrinking Big Amy or the amygdala, or increasing the size of small hippo, or a shrunken, atrophied hippocampus. So that can be, if required, if needed, the third part of dealing with adversity and toxic stress, or the effects actually on the brain and the body, and therefore how we're feeling. So it's an important thing to know if that's something you want to do, if it happened to you. You want to just deal with that and do all three of these things to improve your mental health, be able to deal with adversity and toxic stress, to eliminate it if you can. All three of these things work to do that. Finally, resilience can happen in different settings. We're building resilience and therefore strong mental health. Like I talked about in the last episode, I talked about families, schools, the workplace, and communities. So I really want to focus on schools, families, communities right now, because if a child of any age is dealing with toxic stress, and it's something that can be eliminated, great. But it also is something you want that compassion, those caring relationships at home and at school, or one or both, if you can. Like in some places, it's family life that's very toxic. And so schools become really important for caring relationships and helping to build resilience. Or the communities as well, like community organizations that help youth. We have them here. They're fantastic here in my hometown. So, and everywhere really. So anyway, caring relationships or compassion, we need to remember that that's a key part of helping kids with any sort of toxic stress they're experiencing, which could be like, family life is extremely caring, but school is extremely challenging, and it's just constant fear of failure of, classes and tests and all that stuff, So, and of course, social media. So the research also has been clear for a long, long time that at least one caring relationship will help a child who's living in toxic stress or with constant fear, help them tremendously. And I see that in my practice in adults. It's like, adults I work with who've had a lot of toxic stress, just grown up with so much of abuse and things like that, they had one caring relationship, and that really helped them get through a lot of it. They still need to get help now to make changes and feel better, but grandma, a lot of grandmas out there really were the one caring relationship that helped to build resilience and maintain a certain amount of it. A special teacher, a special person in the community. Just one person who loves you completely really helps with the effects of adversity and toxic stress. So we got to remember that and make sure we're always focusing on that when we're watching, especially kids and adults ourselves, dealing with adversity and toxic stress. To conclude, when we have resilience, when we can build resilience, when we have the factors of resilience, we're remarkably healthy and strong and sturdier to adversity and toxic stress, and therefore having great mental health. I hope this has been helpful to you because you deserve it and you are awesome.